Hey, and welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. As you know, I'm your host. I'm Mary Ann Dersch. I work with nonprofit leaders to master the art of influence so you can get everything you want, need, and deserve in a way that feels good for everyone involved. Because if it doesn't feel good, we're not going to do it. And I'm here with my new friend. Her name's Nicole Stewart. And I'm so excited to talk to you, Nicole, because on so many levels, Nicole, you are the executive director of Boston CASA, and I love CASA. And if you don't know CASA, you train, support community volunteers to serve as court-appointed special advocates for children who have suffered from abuse and neglect. And you have 25 years of experience supporting vulnerable children and advancing equity, education, and justice. I'm so happy you're here today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to
And
be here and I appreciate the invite.
You bet. And we're going to talk about purpose-driven leadership, leading with purpose and intention, which is something I help people do. So I'm so excited to talk about that with you. Now, if you know my podcast, I always start with the same question because it allows me to learn a little bit more, go a little bit deeper with somebody. Tell me something that you're really proud of that you don't get to brag about a lot.
So I know a lot of guests probably say this because we're all in leadership, but I really do mean this. I don't brag enough about my staff. I talk a lot about our volunteers and they deserve to be talked about. But my staff are behind the scenes doing so much of the heavy lifting and always going above and beyond. And I don't talk about them enough. I tell them, but I don't have the opportunity to really in public brag about them the way that I do our CASA volunteers. But we know the world of nonprofit doesn't pay a whole lot of money. And so to be engaged in this work, it really does take a love and a passion, um, and rolling up your sleeves and being willing to kind of just get engaged and get involved and do it all. And they do. And so,
I
and they
love
do it
it.
with a smile. I love them.
That's great. And you say, I bet a lot of people say that, but a lot of people don't. I really haven't heard a lot of people say that. So I want to say that most good teams are driven by good leadership. So tell me what you did as a purpose-driven leader to shape your team.
Let me give you, let me give a little pretext to that first. So I started at Boston Casa just a little over 3 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long, but it was a really pivotal time for the organization, and we were looking to expand and to serve more children. And as you mentioned, what we do is we recruit, we train, we support court-appointed special advocates, also known as CASAs. They're volunteers who get appointed by a judge in the family and juvenile courts to advocate for the best interests of children who are most often removed from their homes due to abuse and neglect, and typically are placed in the foster care system. But at that time, when I joined this organization, we were only serving roughly 15% of these children who would be eligible to have a CASA. And we wanted to have a greater impact, and we wanted more children to have access to what we believe and the data shows is truly life-altering advocacy for these children, as you know personally, Marianne. And in order for the organization to grow, it required change structurally, and in how we operated. Growth meant functioning with greater efficiency. It also meant we had to shift our mindsets to that of a growth mindset. It wasn't going to be business as everyone was accustomed. And if we internally, so our staff and our board of directors were making changes and shifts in how we conducted business, that also meant that we had to get our external partners to shift and change with us. And so, a significant and core skill, just as leaders, that we need to have is the ability to both institute and cope with change. And I think leading an organization through change, in my experience, is one of the most challenging roles in leadership because people don't typically like change or deal with change well. And even if the changes are good and they make sense, most people, even if they decide to go along with it, there's still a lot of grumbling
Right.
and
There's resistance to change.
and resistant chatter. My goodness. And so Well, there is, there is. It's
No, yeah,
human
I get
nature. I don't
it.
care what
Hmm.
it is. And so I really had to strategically navigate how to achieve this this new vision for growth and you know how to achieve it and how to motivate and inspire my team, the board of directors, our volunteers, external stakeholders, et cetera, to also grab hold of this new vision for growth in order for all of us to move in the same direction and have success. And I had three priorities going into the process. And the first one was understanding my own purpose for leading Boss to CASA through this growth plan so that I could lead with conviction. I consider myself a really authentic person. And so that was important to me to understand my why in the process of taking us through this change and why it mattered so much to be able to serve more of these children. In fact, I work with my executive coach on developing a why statement, which took me 2 years. Shamefully, it took me 2 years,
No,
just
no,
about
there's
two
no
years.
shame in that. That's what it takes. That's what it takes.
Yeah, to come up with like 3 sentences. It
Hmm.
was a long process, but worthwhile. And I think anyone who is leading an organization should take the time to do it. After going through the process, I call it a strategic asset, especially when you're leading an organization through a process of change or something that's really difficult. But the second thing I did was I worked to establish the right culture within the organization. And I won't say that it was the second thing that I did because it's actually the very first thing that I did and completed. But really worked to establish the right culture and to hire the right team. Together we created some guiding principles to ensure that there was alignment in our values and in our goals, which just makes leading an organization through this process a lot easier when you have those basic core values and you're working in sync. And thirdly, I really needed to develop a clear strategy for how we would actually achieve the plan for growth so that we could all move together and with clarity and know what it is that we were doing. So that's the pretext, if you will, for how I kind of got to what you had asked about in terms of guiding principles and what I did.
Right. How you intentionally build this team. There's a little bit too that I want to touch on in that. The first is, one of the things that we talked about you did was develop these guiding principles, right? You said there's seven of them or so.
Seven,
Seven, okay.
there are.
And I use the same technique. I call them belief statements, and I think it's the same thing. It's like it's the thing that you know is true, but and it's just like inventorying that and putting it on paper and reflecting on it often and with intention. And
Yep.
I have done this. I do this with teams. I do this with boards. So not just the board saying, "Oh, here's our commitment to," like it's not a board about the organization. It's the board as their guiding principles for themselves. Like here's what we believe. Here, right here's our guiding as board members of this organization. And it just really allows people to be grounded in the purpose, right? Because we're talking about purpose-driven leadership and again, the why. And also, I just want to say, it change takes time, and people, because I help people make change. You help people make change. It's not a magic wand. So he says, "Can you come talk to my?" I just remember I had this call with this guy. This was years ago, and he's telling me about how their team they don't get along, and they're all academics and they had a hard time talking to each other anyway. And I said, how long? I asked him, like, what would you want from me? And he said, I don't know, could you come over for a couple hours and give a talk? And I said, well, how long has this problem been going on? And he said 10 years. I said, I wish I had that kind of power, just like come in with I said, we can work on this. That is not a thing, but it's going to take a little more than, hey, can you come just give us a 2 hour talk? And he was like, oh God, I never thought of it like that. But change is scary. it can be
Process.
scary. It can be hard. It's like, oh, I want change, but I don't want it to affect me. Like I want change, but I want to sit here and be the same. And change calls for everyone's up level, which you've described. And so I appreciate all of that. And I also love, but I'm not sure you mentioned it yet, but I know you did. I know you have that you contracted with a consultant that worked with you for about, you said 18 months. And what was the motive? Speaking of somebody who coaches people, I would love to know the benefit of what was the benefit of hiring somebody? Not that, because I can tell you my own stories, but I'd love to hear what you have, how that benefited you, your
Yeah,
team,
I think
your.
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits for leadership in hiring a consultant, especially when you're doing something that is a team activity, is that it allows you to be part of the process. And so I'm not doing all of the thinking while in the meetings, or in those sessions, but I have someone else who is from the outside, who's helping to facilitate, and I can be part of the team, and the team can see me as much as they possibly can, as one of them, that we're really doing this together. So that's one piece. The other is just being able to have someone. I think it helped the team also to understand how challenging all of this is, that it took so long. It's not just a bunch of statements that we put up and, but it took time for us to come together on some what looks like very basic principles that we should all know and live by. And, but it took a while to come up with these. And so I just think the process in and of itself, it sparked a lot of conversation, a different kind of communication in the organization. And the other piece is, we spent a lot of money on it. Consultants cost, you're a consultant, so you guys cost a lot of money. And so what I wanted to make sure is that once we came up with these guiding principles, that it became a living document, that it was truly. A lot of times we go through these processes, we pay all of this money, it's a checkbox, and we move on to the next thing. And I felt that it was very important for us not to do that. And so what we did with our guiding principles, not only do we have them posted around our office, we also incorporate it into our onboarding so that people who are being hired understand kind of our values, making sure, because hiring, I always say, is a two-way process, always, and
Mhm.
so I want them to vet this organization just as well and say, hey, can I live by this, work, in this kind of environment? And the other piece is that the guiding principles are incorporated. They really are truly the essence of we revamped our our end of year performance evaluation, and these guiding principles are incorporated into our end of year evaluation. And the final thing is just to make sure that they're always, we're always thinking about them and that we're truly living by them. One of my members stepped up, and every month for our all staff meetings, we look at one guiding principle, and she does, an activity or an exercise around that particular
Ooh,
guiding
I love
principle.
that. Yeah, I love that. Just to keep them alive and keep them relevant, you
It's
know.
important. It's important.
When I worked with boards, they before a board meeting, you could either read them or like pick one and talk about it. Um, it's very powerful. Like I call them belief statements. You can call them whatever you want. The language can shift, but the purpose is, and you're right. The value is, sure, you have these statements, but there's also so much value in the journey to get to them. The communication, listening to what people value, people learning to listen, what others value, receiving that feedback themselves, is having that next level communication that there's often not space for in the day-to-day work, right? Where you can have
Mhm.
that visioning, you can take the time to say, what are we creating here, right? Like, what is this? Because on what I believe, and I'm gonna, around fundraising at least, is as that the most powerful fundraising we can do is inviting people into a vision, right? Instead of saying, hey, this, and I know there's hurting people, like this kid's hurting, can you help? Like, no, what would it look like that all our kids were cared for? right? Because in the end, that's what, that's what, like, what would it look like? What would our world be like? Because that's what we're really inviting people into, right? Right? Like that, and that those statements can help shift an organization from being reactive to being very proactive, right? And being future focused, and instead of like, hey, this is what we're creating together. It's a different thing than like, hey, there's a, and I don't want to get too much into this because everybody who listens to me can find this out, but there's a big difference in trying to stop something from happening and trying to make something, not trying to, and then creating something, right? And it's a much
Mhm.
higher vibe, I want to say, to be creating something. And
Mhm.
that's why when I hear you talk, I feel that vibration of like, we're a solid team because we're all creating something together. And I think
Together.
that that future focus keeps you grounded in, and I don't know, maybe this is true for you, but I would love to hear you say this, like it keeps the, not that there's not disputes or differences, but people have their eye on the prize and it
Mhm.
minimizes smaller things. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, it gives everyone, all of us as a team, a common core to come back to. If there are disagreements, we can, we'll use the guiding principles and say, okay, we value excellence, so we value collaboration, so it gives us a starting point, because sometimes you just lose your way. You
Sure.
lose sight of what's really important. But it's those common goals, and those common core values that can help to bring us back together and back in alignment. And so
Yeah.
that's what the guiding principles do. It keeps us aligned with one another because these are contractual agreements that we all agreed on,
Hmm.
and so they are really. I think that it's critical for every organization to have when we call them guiding principles, but whatever it is that you want to call them,
Yeah.
to have some core values that everyone is aware of.
And that you are living them and working towards them, and and it's like yoga, it's like a practice, right? You're constantly evolving them and working on them and getting better at them because there's always the next level to uncover, there's always the next, what I mean, that what I had a therapist
Mhm.
call it, like the next thing coming up for clearing, right? Like there'll be, there's always the next leveling of leadership of your team, where like, okay, we worked on this. Oh, here comes this other thing. Oh, great, because this is a practice, and we're always evolving and growing. And that's what I love about what you're saying. And I also really just want to emphasize that change takes time. And I worked with a team for 18 months, and I worked with a group, I talk about them all the time, the Sisters of St. Joseph, their mission advancement and their communications team, and they were like silos, and we worked on helping them understand that they're part of the same process, and they each have a role in a process of enrolling people into the organization. And we worked together for, I'd say, a year and a half. And then it came to the point where they're like, okay, we got it. Like, yay, my job is done, right? And now they're actually restructuring everything, and they're really committing to this in a whole other way that does no longer needs me. And but that, it was nice for me to come as an outside person to facilitate some conversation so that, like you said, the development person, that they could be a part of the process, instead of trying to like wear a bunch of hats and run it and be a part of it, and also just to help them navigate the feedback. And I, I just, change can happen. It takes time and commitment, and I think what happens a lot is we just want it to happen. And then if, after a couple months, you're like, well, this isn't working. Right. And so we're just going to go back. It just takes some time. And it
Takes
can happen.
time. Yeah, I also, I would emphasize that not only does it take time, but it takes strategy. So developing guiding principles is not just about having, core values that align your team, but it's also marketing, right? It's branding for your
Yep.
organization. So it's not only how you want to be represented within your organization and how you want to have communication flow between your team members, but it's also how you want to be represented as a leader. I want to know that when my team members go out into the community or they're interacting with our volunteers, or with some of our stakeholders or partners, that they're also representing this organization so that well, right? And so those guiding principles also helps to give us that advantage strategically, when we're outward facing in the community.
And actually, that's really interesting that you said that because my background is communications and marketing, and that one of the reasons I started to use this tool was to help people as a first step in branding, right? Like, how
Mhm.
can I present myself if I don't understand who I am, right? And I don't, if we don't know what we stand for, how can we put that image out there? And it's about to us, I can't, and the team that I worked with for a long time, we can't assign that to you, right? We can pull it out of you, but we can't tell you. And so that's why I started to use them is that what it was part of a bigger branding process to help organizations define who they are, what they stood for, and how they wanted to be seen. And and to be confident in that. And then that's a whole nother thing. The visibility is a whole nother thing. But because that's what leadership means. It means you're stepping into something, and sometimes you're being called to speak, and when you're not, when like you're being called into a conversation that maybe you didn't ask to be a part of, but that's what leadership looks like. And then so how do we present ourselves? When do we speak up and when do we don't? And so that's why I started using them that in the context. And then in the course that I run, I have people do them individually. So we create our own individual guiding principles that we share,
Mhm.
and they grow and
Mhm.
change. But I just find it one of the most beneficial tools that I have, because people kind of come alive when they do. Because I said it's all around you. We're just inventorying what is pretty known. So and I
Mhm.
love that. Okay. I want to shift a little bit. Go ahead. Do you want to add something before I shift?
Well, I don't know what you're shifting to, so I may end up
If there's
taking
something
us
else you
down a
want to say
completely
about the
different
guiding
road.
principles, throw it out there.
No, no.
Okay. I want to talk about being a CASA a little bit and volunteer recruitment. Because being a CASA is not, and okay, let me just back up a little bit. I have
Mhm.
My kids are adopted out of foster care. I have two nephews that are adopted out of foster care. So I know this intimately. I know what CASAs do. I've also helped CASA in St. Louis specifically, and a couple of others, Nevada and a couple of with marketing. So I
Yeah.
understand from that perspective. My nephews, now they are, I want to say 27 and 30 now. They were 8 and 11 when my they joined our family. My sister and brother-in-law adopted them. They had been in 11 homes in 4 years. The
Mm.
system did them no favors. It was a different, it was years ago. I know things have, I think things have gotten better. I don't know for sure. Anyway, but the one constant in their life was their CASA, Mike Rosenthal, who also stopped being a CASA when Eric and Lamont got adopted because it wore him like it that carrying those boys into adoption. They had had a disruption adoption. They had a placement where they were abused, and Lamont Hotline. Anyway, like they had been through a lot, and them landing with my sister and my brother-in-law, and it was not easy. It was not easy. It wasn't they There was a lot to unwind from. So I just know the power of a CASA. I also know that it is not for everybody. Right? Like,
Mhm.
and typically these are kind of like type A people who don't take crap, who are really good advocates, who aren't, this is my perception, who are easily intimidated. There's a specific kind of person that is a CASA, right? And so what I saw people doing was trying to minimize what it takes to be a CASA. Like, oh, it's not like we'll teach you. instead of doing what I was coaching them to do, which is like be very honest about what it is and who you're looking for, because then that's who you're going to get. And it was almost the same thing with Big Brothers Big Sisters, where they were like, oh, it just takes a couple hours a month. Yes, it does. And also, this is a long commitment. And if that's not, and that's okay, right? So I would love to hear your thoughts about what you all do to, especially if people who are listening have volunteer jobs that are, they think are like yours, sort of the Peace Corps, the toughest job you'll ever love. Kind of volunteer. They're looking for something specific and they may be afraid to ask for it because they think they're not going to get it. So I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, and you're right. Just like any volunteer role or professional role isn't for everybody. I would say the same thing about being a CASA. I call our CASAs our earthly angels. They're just, it does take a special kind of person. And fortunately, we have a lot of those special kind of people, not just here in Massachusetts or in Suffolk and Middlesex counties, the counties I represent in Massachusetts. But there are 939 CASA programs across the country. And so there are a lot of good people out there doing some really, really good but challenging work. And let me just back up for a second because the work, we talk about our why and our purpose. This work is so personal and so important to me. From the time I was 3 years old until I aged out of the system at 22, I was in foster care. And because I was in the foster care system, I truly do know the power of what it means to have that consistent and caring adult in your life. And I was fortunate. I lived in about 7 different foster homes before the age of 17. And I was very fortunate to come across one foster mother, and the only person who I ever called mom. And she grabbed me at a really critical time in my development when I was 5 years old, but exposed me to a lot in the period of time that I was with her. And it just led me on a path in life. I forgot where I started, Marianne. Well, your editor edits and cuts and
Yeah.
pastes and stuff. Okay, so um, so so I was in foster care from the age of 3 until I aged out around the age of 22 years old. And because I was in the foster care system, I really do know the power of what it means to have a consistent and caring adult in my life. And that's what our CASAs provide to the children who we serve and work with at Boston CASA. So this work is just so personal to me. And I like to use myself as an example because it shows people like the downward trajectory, of the path that you may not ever get a chance to see, in terms of your impact on a child's life. And so, you know, I'm not going to tell my age, but, you know, there are many people who would have never imagined, right, that I would be where I am today, and including myself. And so, sometimes I say that to inspire, this is to speak to what you had talked about in terms of some people don't feel like, CASAs, it either may be too much or, and so what I say to that is, the kind of impact, you never know the kind of impact that you're going to have on someone's life. And so we have over 200 CASA volunteers who are serving more than 300 children in the counties that we represent in Massachusetts. And most of our children are removed from their home and placed in the foster care, the child welfare system, as I was. And, Marianne, I'm preaching to the choir, but for the sake of our audience, during these times when children are removed from their homes, they're faced with so much uncertainty about their life in that moment. And while at the same time they're thrust into the legal system and the child welfare system, these are systems that are just incredibly challenging for even most of us as adults to navigate. And the experience for these children, it's very isolating and extremely traumatic. And it leaves them really vulnerable. And the vulnerability is truly evidenced in the staggering outcomes for children who have experienced foster care. Just to rattle off a few, I won't go through a whole bunch, but just to, give some context, 50% of children who've been in foster care don't graduate from high school. Only 3 or 4% will actually earn a 4-year college degree. 70% of them will experience homelessness by, the time they're 26 years old. And so for our CASAs, in terms of the impact that they have, the outcomes of children who have a CASA, they're just better. They do better in school. They're more likely to receive the services and support and the resources that they need to thrive. And they're more likely to find a safe and stable home. You know, Research tells us that all it takes is one caring adult who
Yep.
can significantly
One
impact.
caring adult. That's what you need is one caring adult.
Um, and that person can significantly impact the well-being of a child. So, CASAs, they are that one consistent adult who walk with these children and youth through these very difficult processes and systems. They care, and they typically they stick with the child or the youth until their cases are closed. And uniquely, very uniquely, our CASAs, they work one-to-one with that child. And I say uniquely because everyone else, from social workers to attorneys, the judges, everyone else has a caseload. And so our CASAs are able to give that one-to-one undivided attention and develop that trust and relationship with these children. And they're volunteering. So it's not like, kids don't say, oh, you're just doing this because of, whatever organization you're working for. They're volunteers. And so, our CASAs, they're so impressive in how they give of themselves and the difference, the true difference, life-changing difference that they make for these children. And, we don't just grab any volunteer off the street, although anyone, if you're 21 or older,
Yeah.
if you're interested in being a CASA, there's a whole process that you have to go through. But, you know, we don't reject anyone, based on, race or nationality or income background or, professional background. But there is a process that people have to go through because we are working with, our most vulnerable children and youth.
And
And
you are court
so
appointed. So, you
they
are,
are
you are sworn in and right, and you are court appointed. And, a CASA is the one person that has no other agenda or no other, no other, need or other than the kid. And like I said, there's no caseload, there's no having to appease a supervisor, nothing like that. They are just like, hey, I'm here to make sure the kid gets what the kid needs, the services, the things like that. And you're right, the system, like even as a foster adoptive mom, I'm not easily overwhelmed. That when you're talking about your kid, it can be overwhelming. And even after my kids were adopted, I would have, educational advocates and things like that because the system is tough to navigate. And, here I am, a person of, of some education and confidence, and I'm overwhelmed. Can you imagine, and it's a lot. And we wish it was different, and we're working on making it different. And also, it is so important to have somebody that their job is like to make sure the kids are getting whatever they need. And you're right, like as one of my clients is a foster adoptive care coalition here in St. Louis, and I just helped them with the whole 35th anniversary thing. But what I was shocked to see is not just the foster care to homelessness, but the foster care to prison. And I can't remember the exact step, but a lot of people who are in prison have been through the foster care system. And like, how can we reverse this? And but it shows that when you have like that one caring person, that can change everything and in your life, not just then. And I have met a couple of people who really were thinking about adopting and were had the intention of adopting or were thought about that and then wound up being a CASA because they could help a kid but they without actually like they weren't really prepared to like take on a kid 24/7 but they had and I thought that was a great find for them like because they really wanted to help but maybe just having a kid in their home wasn't something they could either do or ready for but they definitely you don't have to have the kid in your home to have a huge impact on their life, as you are a witness to.
And we also, so we have a CASA, a beautiful story. We have a CASA. Actually, she's no longer a CASA. She's now serving on our board of directors. But she trained to become a CASA and got involved with this case with a little girl. I think she was 6 years old. And they couldn't find a home for her. And she ended up adopting the little girl. And because she had to go through the whole process, which is it's pretty daunting, right? Of trying to adopt her, she really up close got to see the challenges, the bigger systemic challenges, and she wanted to do more. She couldn't become a cause because now she has a child. And so she wanted to do more and came and spoke with me and after the whole adoption process was over and became a board member. So, and I can tell you story after story of, how our CASAs stay involved. They want to. So it's not something that's required, but want to stay engaged and involved in the lives of their kiddos, even after the case is closed. So there's so many beautiful stories, and what's really nice is that for our CASAs, most of them who I speak with, it's not just what they're giving, but it's also what they're receiving in return. And so there is a reciprocity. And so yes, it's time that you're giving. There's an emotional impact often. It's hard for there not to be an emotional impact, right?
Yeah.
But what a lot of our CASAs get out of it, just in terms of being able to, number one, support and to help and to provide, just life-changing opportunities for these young people. They also learn about a lot about life themselves because some of our CASAs don't come from the same walks of life and have no idea the challenges, the systemic challenges that people have, and have to navigate. And so they also just learn a lot about our systems and the child welfare system and the real life challenges that people go through, even for some of these kids, their parents. I think we're quick to place blame, but you know, life is challenging and everyone
Yes.
has their own challenges. And oftentimes, like even with these foster children, or children who have experienced foster care, when they come out of it, and as I just talked about the statistics, and you mentioned the the prison pipeline, it's like 70% will have been incarcerated, at
Yeah.
some point in life. That's staggering,
That is
you
staggering.
know. And so, but that is also why, the cycle repeats itself. And so this is an opportunity, to break those cycles, and so we train our CASAs really well. We not only train, but support them once they become a CASA. So there's 35 hours of pre-service training. Everyone has to be Corey Story, there's a full background check. And then they're supported throughout the process, and there's continuing education and training monthly for them to attend. So it's a commitment, but I think that once people get involved and they're engaged in the process, they also realize, yeah, I'd like to go to this training because they're
They
involved and
want,
they
yeah, they're committed. They want to learn more. They want to do their best.
And they want to
Um,
be, yeah, biggest
so
impact that they possibly can.
I have a couple more questions. The first one is, you work with heavy stuff, you know, children who have, experienced abuse and neglect, maybe can no longer stay in a home. How do you, in your team, your CASA, how do you help people not just want to crawl under their desk? I mean, is there something you do as a team to help people process or to help to stay positive? Or, how do you process all of the sometimes difficult situations that you run into?
So, one of our guiding principles is that we create a culture of self care so that we can perform at our very best. So, that's partly at the core of who we are. So, um, our team, I believe, that they feel very supported by one another, by the administration. It's a very, we have a very open culture, and invite people to be able to talk. Um, Everyone has their birthday off as a holiday.
Oh, I like
What
that.
what organization does that, Marianne?
My old job, I worked at a company for 501 Creative for 16 years, and we had every Tuesday we had massage. So we had this person, this is
Oh,
her whole business. She comes into offices and does like a 30-minute, table massage. Like, we had this little room, and you'd go in and you get your little massage, and like that was part of our, and you couldn't miss. Sometimes if you had a meeting, oh no, we can't do that on Tuesday. Um, but that was kind of part of that, the creating the structure of self-care, like giving people their birthday off and things like that. Yeah.
and so we really care about each other. We understand that this is tough work. Um, and, we make sure that, for example, our advocate supervisors feel very supported because they're having to support our volunteers, So, and whatever that support, sometimes it's individualized. It's like everyone has their own IEP, right?
Yes, yes. Right. So whatever you need for
Whatever
support,
it is
right?
that you need. What do
But
you need
that
right now?
but that you define it at, right, and so we have like one of the things I work with people on are key performance indicators, right? KPIs, but we have KFIs, your key fulfillment indicators, and what are the things you commit to
I like that.
do to care for yourself. So like, so when you're talking about as part of your evaluation process, that could be like, hey, and part of, like, it could be, hey, if somebody has the day off, you do not, whatever it is can wait, that kind of thing, like making agreements where you don't reach out to people who are out of office, where they like, one group, they worked with their child advocacy center, and they did a monthly lunch out of the office. The whole team would go somewhere and go to lunch and not talk about work. Like, that was just like, so everybody can pick what they want, but we would track that. Did you complete that? Right? Are you on top of that? Um, as just as you would a key performance indicator. And because
Mhm.
if you're going to put it out, like, you to constantly, there's a Rumi quote I use all the time: we give from the overflow, not the depths of the well. So that,
Mm.
keeping that well full is so critical, to come from a place of like energy and abundance, and right, and not that everything's sunshine and rainbows. It's just that, but when you're coming from a place where you feel that you can have something to give, rather than when your tank is empty, because
Yes.
that's when the resentment builds, and right, and like the things like that. Okay, I have one more question, since we're talking about all the key fulfillments of our life. One of mine, I'm gonna go now. We're taking a big shift, and one of mine is karaoke. So, Nicole, if you're in St. Louis or I'm in Boston, the high probability of you winding up in a karaoke bar, right? There's a big, big probability. What would be your go-to song?
Oh God. Some Jesus. Um, so I love music. And so this is a really difficult question for me. And sometimes when I play my music playlist, like my friends will kind of side eye me because I'll play country music. Like they never know what they're going to get. And I'm singing along, like,
Well,
what?
what
So
song is this?
I love music, so it's really hard. But I would say that my go-to song, like if I had to do a go-to song, it would be something gospel, because it just grounds me in my soul. It, that is what fulfills me. And so if I needed something to go to, it's probably not going to be pop or hip hop or
There you go.
it's probably going to be something spiritual and gospel because that means I'm having a moment and
We're going to church at the bar, Nicole.
we're
Here
going
we
to church.
go.
I'm taking you right to church.
That's right. Bring it. I love it. This has been an amazing conversation. I am so glad to know you, just for the work you're doing with kids and in care, which is, of course, near and dear to my heart. I mean, my kids are older now and my nephews are older, but those we're that will always be near and dear to me and part of my family. And also just from the work you do as far as how you can build, really sustainable, positive cultures. And I feel like there's, a lot of people, let's just say, operating on an empty tank who and who aren't investing in their culture and what can pay off when you do. And so I appreciate you being a model for that for everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna put all your contact info in the show notes if you're on Facebook and Instagram, and if you're interested in people are getting in touch with you or seeing more, or if you're a Boston area person and you want to be a CASA, reach out to Nicole. It is the most amazing. It's like I said, it's not an, I don't want to say that. I'm just gonna say it is a job with a purpose and it's a huge impact and it is a one-on-one. And so that's something that like really energizes you to be able to give one-on-one to a kid. That's a great thing. So thank you so much for being here. And if you want to get in touch with me at all about how to create change or grow the culture of your organization, I'm here for you too. And as always, my contact info is in the show notes. Thanks again, Nicole, for being here.
Thanks, Marianne, for inviting me. It was fun.